Hello, everyone. How's it hanging? I'm Eli. You might know me as your boy. I don't know.
Restart.
No. I had a bid. All right, go.
P squared.
Get a bit. What was the bit?
No. Just do it normally. But if you sound a little off from the first two, it's
Okay.
fine. I have a follow up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Eli. This is When the Lights Go Out, the podcast. How's it going? How are you? Sean, how are you?
As you can tell, I think we're reaching burnout of part 3 of our miniseries, but I'm feeling good. I'm excited.
Yes, that's right, Sean. It's part 3 of our miniseries where we look at a historical event or multiple historical events under one kind of umbrella and a sports event, and we look at how they intertwine and how they're kind of always related. And you can't really.
Intersectionality.
Hell yeah.
Exactly.
That's a SAT word if I've ever heard one.
Oh, damn. I was going to say that. Go on.
So just to reiterate, and you've probably heard all our voices now, but I'm Eli.
I'm Moof.
I'm Sean. Follow me on Twitter. Nino Applause.
Always be plugging.
I'm James. You don't have to follow me on Twitter.
You can, though. What's your name? Not James?
Not James Natoli.
I think it's not James Natoli.
It's not James
It might be
Natoli.
confusing though. So if it's
It
too
is
complicated,
James Natoli, but it's at not James Natoli.
it's tough.
It's always tough. But
That's a thinker right there.
and James is a thinker.
I tried to at least once a day.
Right. So today's topic, our third topic in this 4-part miniseries, is going to be the Iranian hostage crisis of 1980 to 1981. 1979, 1981? James,
79 to 81. Yeah.
Yes, that. Kind of like almost Reagan time. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Those of you white folk out there.
yes.
So yeah, let's just hop into it. James, why don't you just kind of tell us a brief overview of the crisis?
You want some fast facts? Is that
Fast
what you're asking
facts.
for?
Tell us
All right.
what's popping.
So I'll tell you what wasn't popping. Iran on November 4th, 1979.
We're getting better.
Go
Yeah,
on.
I can give like a little bit. I think we should take a few steps back first.
Okay.
Like obviously this took place in the capital city of.
Where I backed away from my camera.
Don't worry, we'll cut that.
I want to take a few steps back.
This is also on YouTube.
We'll cut that too.
All of that deserves
We
to be
will
cut.
also
Keep
cut
going,
that.
please.
Go on, keep going.
Okay, right. So, like the Iranian hostage crisis took place in Tehran, the capital, in 1979 to 81. But the reasons behind it are much more deeper and involve the previous like 30 to 40 years. And just kind of like the hot spots. Basically, the Iranian leader was a U.S. and UK backed man. I might pronounce his name wrong, but it was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, more commonly referred to as the Shah. And he ruled from like the 40s to 79, and he was not well liked by the people in Iran at all. And so eventually the Iranians deposed of him, and he was just like booted out. And in a strange course of events, he happened to have cancer at this time. And so he comes up to the United States and he's like, hey, you got to let me in. I need treatment. I have cancer. And Iran's like, you better not let him in. Like, we don't like this guy. He did a lot of bad things to us, which is true. And Iran was also just tired of being ruled by a leader who they had not elected and didn't like and shared the US's like imperialist views. So Carter was the president at this point. He'd been elected in 76.
Yes.
And he
Mr.
chose,
Peanut.
yeah, our favorite.
The nut man.
Still alive. He is still kicking. Him and his vice president are still out there.
Like together.
I hope so.
They go out and they're like, what are we gonna do today, VP?
They might not remember each other. They're very old. But so the U.S. government made the decision to allow the Shah back into the United States. And the new Iranian government did not like this. So the new leader was the Ayatollah Khomeini. You might know him from We Didn't Start the Fire. Ayatollahs in Iran. Yeah, that part.
Yes.
So
That's a nice poll. Go on. You've
yeah.
piqued my interest now.
So he was deposed in February, and after he's allowed back into the United States for his cancer treatments, Iran sort of like lashes out in protest of that decision, and also just the many years of kind of grievances they had, and they stormed the U.S. embassy in Tehran on November 4th of 79. So for 444 days, they took 52 Americans hostage. So if you're really good at math, you can figure out that they were released on December 20th of 1981. And similar to this year, December 20th, 1981, was Inauguration Day for President Ronald Reagan. And those were essentially tied together. The Iranians did not like President Carter, and they released the hostages basically minutes after noon Eastern time when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. They pretty much tanked his reelection chances. We can go into more of that later. There's a lot on that, but that's sort of the background. Yeah, there was 52 Americans held in hostage for over a year in the embassy, and there were many attempts to get them out, both diplomatic, multiple military ones, one in particular that I find interesting, but yeah, so that's what was going on in Iran at the time.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in to say how it kind of relates to the sporting world, and then we can kind of go into all that stuff. There is I think it's like an NFL Films documentary. It's like it's like an hour television show, so 45 minutes or something like that. And it kind of, to be fair, it's like a television program about the NFL, so it makes a lot of claims that like it was the most important part of this, which obviously like isn't true. The human life part is probably pretty big, but basically there was a reporter there who promised like the guards that he would give them, or he would show them a recording of the Super Bowl. This was November when they were taken hostage, and the Super Bowl would have occurred like very early the next year. And so he promised them a recording of the Super Bowl, which was the Rams and Steelers. You might know it as the Steelers' fourth Super Bowl of the kind of the 70s. Obviously it happened in early 1980, but it was, the steel curtain, Iron Curtain, very different. The steel curtain, Terry Bradshaw, and so they let him stay and show them the recording because they were all like invested in American football. And there were also like people would send their family updates about the sporting, about sports, about football specifically, and they let those messages through and stuff through the reporter. And they ended up being released like 5 days, I think, before the 1981 Super Bowl, where the Eagles lost.
Ooh.
Moof.
Uncalled for.
To the Raiders.
That was pre-merger though, right?
No, that was post-merger.
Wow. Doubly uncalled for. Twice as uncalled for.
Twice as uncalled for. That's almost as many Super Bowls as the Eagles have won post-merger. Almost. Just kidding. Eagles have won.
How many have the Washington football team won in the last 20 years?
In the last 20 years? None.
0, because they didn't exist back then.
They're 1-0 for going to playoffs though, so
they are 1-0 in playoffs.
Anyways,
I got. You're right. I got.
So they, in kind of the wake of the release of the hostages, there was a lot of like, they like just got back from not being with their families and stuff, so they obviously like didn't go to the game. But I think there was like almost like a parade for them, kind of involved in the Super Bowl like preparations, and a lot of flags, a lot of, as we kind of have talked about previously, how sports and nationality kind of go together. And the Super Bowl is like, probably, if I had to put money on one game being the most American game there is, the Super Bowl is probably that, or at least it has been for the past 50 years.
Yeah, we call them the world champions, but like no one else plays American football.
Nobody else plays American football. Technically, that makes them the world champions, but also absolutely not.
But like,
But you're right.
One thing
It's a big motive.
Yeah. So it's like a big American celebration. Many people have talked about making the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday federal holiday.
Yeah, I mean, like what you're saying.
I'd support that.
Like, but if you look at just like viewership numbers, I think the last like top 10 viewership things in the last like 10 or 15 years, 8 of them at least minimum would be Super Bowls.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the way this doesn't have a lot to do with sports, but the way television kind of has been more towards streaming, and so it's hard to kind of calculate those numbers. And where many people in the population are still kind of watching TV live, and many are have switched. But like sports, and specifically like playoff sports, and even more specifically the Super Bowl, are so important to the society that you almost have to watch them live. And so there's like no streaming later. It's kind of everyone dials in, and the Super Bowl is one of those things where even non-sports fans watch, which is a pretty big deal. Because like, I don't know how, like say half the population of the world, or not the world, of the United States are really into sports. The other half, or a large portion of those, would come and watch. So the viewership just goes up.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, it's pretty cool to think about the fact that they like recorded this on what I assume was like a VCR tape, right?
Yeah.
And then like got it into these hostages, and it definitely like these are people that were completely cut off from the world. I don't like if the people holding them spoke English, they probably didn't speak it around them, so like they're not hearing their English language, they're not seeing anything. A lot of times they're being held separately. Like they're being told different things, all the sort of things you do to people that you're having captive, and like being able to see like good old boys knocking the pigskin around on the field, I'm sure was like a big, like a very like grounding moment for them. I mean, this was early on in there. There's still almost a year of captivity to go, but I'm sure that was helpful for them to be surviving this and going through it, and also just sort of like a statement about like their values. Like that's what they chose to bring to them, not like a baseball game, or not like a cartoon show, or I don't know what shows were big in the late 70s, not even like a record. They were like, no, they want to see the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, like we've talked about this previously, but sports is one of those things where like it can be used to ingrain nationality within people, or like bring that back.
Yeah.
So it's like you go, like I was talking about previously, one side of it is country versus country, like us versus them kind of mentality, and then the other side brings out like us together kind of mentality, you know,
enjoying
so, like,
the same thing.
Yeah, it's like it brings people together.
Yeah, and I think there was probably both of those going on. And like for the hostages, it's like, right, this is us, let's come together, watch this. But it's also like, we're the only country that plays American football. We're the best at it. Like this is not, and that was much how the world was being portrayed in back then. This is like the height of the Cold War. United States this is when the terms like first, second, and third world originated, because first world was like all the so-called democratic governments, and the second world was the communist governments, and third world was everyone else who we didn't care about that much. So like we drew lines and denoted countries. There was the Iron Curtain, not the Steel Curtain. We colored countries red. We didn't like them.
He brought it back, son of a bitch.
So the story itself is pretty insane of how the reporter got the recording to them. So the guy's name was Alex, Paen. Let's say Pan. Pan. He was 26.
Pan's dad.
He was
Oh my
20.
gosh.
He was 26 at this time.
26.
I'm almost 26.
He was a Los Angeles radio reporter, and
Nice.
he was doing a lot of coverage. He was in Tehran when the U.S. Embassy was taken over by protests, and he like convinced his boss and a bunch of other news organizations to like help fund his trip to go to Iran during this hostage crisis
Wow.
to like report on it. And so he gets there and he's able to convince the guards to like give him like Christmas cards and give him like a bunch of other stuff. And he learned later like they burned a lot of the letters and unopened the radio cassettes. But he asked them, he asked the guards like, could you give them a recording of like the Super Bowl? And they said they would do it under one condition: if the announcers of the game tell the world that the guards are letting the hostages listen to the game.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. That was a big part of it.
And it's like this crazy moment where it's like, so like the announcers of this game are like talk about how like the hostages are also going to be listening to this game. And it was like, for the guards, the Iranian guards, it was like to show that like, oh, they're being treated graciously or whatever. And like for the actual like hostages, it was like a moment of like the whole world is like, cares about you. Like the whole at that moment, like they like one of the prisoners talked about how like they felt like the world's like emotion towards them. Probably mainly the U.S. obviously, but like still. Like,
yeah.
Go ahead.
That's definitely interesting that they would, because like the Iran hostage crisis was a huge blow to like the American psyche of like, we are the best and no one can ever like, still like thriving off the like post World War II kind of vibe. And like in like our biggest moment of like Super Bowl Americaness, they're like also these like, I think they were students like are holding Americans hostage.
Yeah. So
like they have to think about that while trying to celebrate being hyper American and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. And I think it kind of connects to a lot of things that have come up since then that we actually have talked about on many other podcasts, but kind of the unwillingness for many people in America to allow sports and either politics or kind of social issues, things that still affect most, if not all, people in some ways. They don't like to. A lot of people don't like to let those things merge, but they don't really like it when it's forced upon them. But it's like you're never gonna get around those things because so many people both like sports and like exist in places where there are problems, which is everywhere.
Yeah.
Name a place that doesn't have a problem, and I'll show you a crack in the street. I mean, that's a very pessimistic way of doing it.
But sports definitely becomes like a really crazy conglomeration of different parts of like the social political sphere. Like it becomes like an outlet for like the people who are not at the top. So like the people like the fans, like it just becomes like an outlet form of entertainment. And then it's also like becomes like a political tool. It becomes like a stage, like a world stage. It's all revolving around like people playing a game, which is like, it's like
objectively a thing that like 8-year-olds could do in their backyard.
And it's, there's so much, there's just always so much behind it. I mean, and like this story is like just one of the insane things, like just about the impact it has. And the reporter like literally went to his hotel room, unscrewed his telephone at a cap, and like put the cassette right next to that telephone. That was
oh my god.
And
that's so low budget.
DIY. And it's like, and he like convinced the guards, and the guards like also wanted to listen to the game too. And it's like it's just like such a weird like and then so it's like such a small event, like this guy's recording a game because of the hostages, but at the same time the announcers tell like all of America like, hey, those hostages. It must have been like such, I wonder how like it would have been it's like being watching that game like on TV and like be at a Super Bowl party or something and just like hear that and you're like holy,
wait a minute.
And that's the other thing too about sports is like a lot of it can be a form of escapism too. That's what they talk about with these prisoners. It was like one of them was like for like a couple hours it was like a nice escape, a nice connection back to the rest of the world. and it's like you can be people have a lot of people can escape to like this world of entertainment while everything is still just going on, and that's what that announcement kind of like how that when I was reading it impacted me.
Yeah, it's sort of the perfect. I think it was like Ben Shapiro who was like sports are like my escape. Like you can't stop doing this to me, and it's sort of like they did this a while ago, and like, but it was it's
if you like sports that much, you would probably know.
I think
the thing with that is, I mean, sports is just like in the foreground for a minute, but then everything else is still happening around it, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and this is one of the biggest examples of that, I guess.
I think one of the like key takeaways from these discussions we've had so far is how when people say shut up and dribble or keep politics out of sports, like it's always been there.
Yeah.
Like
what they really mean is take your politics out of my sports.
Stop telling me about it.
and like as we talked about in episode 1, if you haven't listened to it, you should go back and listen to it. We talked about how like those African American athletes who wanted to like they were thrust upon the world stage being asked, you should come out and say you're against Jewish discrimination. Oh, you should also not go because you're against, like, they didn't choose. No, they didn't choose. And I think that's one of the things to like connect to like sports of now. Like most of these athletes probably didn't choose to become political figures, but the world thrust upon like the system onto them.
Yeah. Like back in episode 1, it was the opposite of shut up and dribble. They were like, you need to go over there and say something. And now, so they totally pick and choose. And like a glaring example is like the like hyper nationalist like military performances that we have before all of our sports games. Like
that is politics. Yeah.
If you haven't listened to the podcast where we talk about this,
I'm gonna go listen to it right after this.
Go listen to the podcast where we talk about
it. It's really great. We talked a lot about how the national anthem became played before every sports game.
Right.
Yeah. In America, it's very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I really think, Sean, especially from what you were kind of saying, it made me think like it could this type of situation, this specific situation, could only happen with sports and politics, or some sort of true like humanitarian issue. Like those are the only. It's weird that as we kind of go through this little mini series, we kind of find that a lot of these things are weirdly compatible in very specific ways, and it only seems to be sports and these humanitarian issues. And it's just crazy. Like if it were something else besides sports, it probably wouldn't have happened in the same way or even at all. And that's something kind of you pointed out. And that's a really important thing about all of these that we're talking about.
It's almost like there's a vacuum for kind of like the arts on the world stage in a sense. Like TV and media and movies obviously do that to a certain extent, but like sports is so prominent, and when you have such a large stage, it's almost like you're naturally going to have the plot and the actors fill that stage,
right?
No matter what you do. So you're going like it's unavoidable to the where it happens everywhere we've discussed. Like there's something you can do about it.
I feel like it's very similar to the kind of, or at least the way people view it. It's very similar to the plots of movies, but it's so, of these like very human stories, universal stories. But there's no, I mean, you can watch it without understanding what's happening, who's talking. It's basically just like you're looking at physical actions. You can see facial expressions. You can see when people are happy, when people are sad. It's one of those things where you don't need a lot to understand the general concept of what's happening. And so it's kind of easy access. Yeah.
I think definitely with like easy access, especially I'm talking about when Sean was saying that like sports and football, like regular, like working class people are going to sit down and watch the Super Bowl, and like they might not have been aware of the hostage situation. Like there might have been a news broadcast in November, and then it comes up now. But this, like, certainly now they are aware. And I do know for a fact, like, I don't know the major news networks would sign off every single night, because they used to sign off, and with saying like it has now been X number of days, and they like this certainly falls in line with that, keeping this the hostage crisis in the forefront of people's minds, and then like keeping in with that this hit to their American psyche of being the best at everything. And they took that and then they voted, and like it certainly affected like the history of our country, because Ronald Reagan won in 1980. And you could make a fairly plausible argument that like having this hostage crisis broadcast in the Super Bowl early in that year like made a lot of people upset with Carter. So
yeah, it very well could have had a small, medium, large part in kind of changing the history. As how we see it. I think that's a great. Sean, you have something to say?
Quick. I was just gonna say there was no Twitter back in the day, so like I think what James saying is like very, very apt.
Yeah.
Like there's the news and the TV news, like they can only report on something for so long until like like full-time news networks came about later. But like so like eventually they probably moved on from those headlines, and there wasn't social media to remind you every day. So I think like a reminder in the middle of the winter, of 80,
right,
probably was like, oh, like wait, this is still a huge issue. Like, the
information density that they had at or information
lack of
flux density.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That they had, that they were, per minute, per hour, per day, per week, how much information they received about the world is going to be, was at that point probably vastly different than the ridiculous amount of information people can go through now, and how it's very hard to sort through it all. But I mean, I think that's a great place to stop. It's especially with this one. It's actually with all of them. There's kind of more questions than answers that we come up with, where we say like, we've kind of been just like looking at these instances and saying these are very interesting things that we don't really know or can't understand or can't pinpoint a very specific reason for all of these things. And this is one of those ones that I think relates very specifically to the United States in the way we kind of live now, because especially since the Reagan administration wasn't that long ago, and it created situations that we're still kind of dealing with culturally, politically. So thanks for you guys for coming and talking with me. Thanks for you guys for listening or watching, if you watch us on YouTube. This is part 3 of a 4-part mini-series. The next episode in this mini-series is the last. For you guys, it's been weeks. For us, it's been like an hour and a half.
And you can't just give it up like that.
Dude, there's a video podcast, and I'm wearing the same shirt.
We're cutting it.
Let me go change.
I think you're also required to cut that joke in the final edit.
The number of things we cut. Now that's really something I'm not going to tell, because it's
but the number of things I have kept and Eli doesn't know about is also vast.
Not until this comes out, in which case I will be disappointed with you.
It'll be too late. Forgiveness permission.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Anyways, I'm Eli.
Moof.
I'm Sean.
James.
And this is When the Lights Go Out. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for the last time.